let's go back to the question you asked about political orientation and what the values are. And I've done a lot of thinking about this long before I went to Panama to see this. And I've come to the conclusion that we've been sold a bill of goods, and the bill of goods was called multiculturalism. And the problem with multiculturalism is that it sounds like something that those of us who like to interact with people from many different cultures should appreciate. But it's in fact the opposite of the value that we actually hold. The value that we actually hold, I would call Western cosmopolitanism.
Yeah,
Western
that's very
cosmopolitanism. It's the opposite, right? Multiculturalism is the idea that people should not join our societies, but they should maintain their own traditions in an isolated pocket, and that we should effectively reject the idea of becoming one people in the West.
It's just a reduplication of the situation that obtains in the world at large, with no appreciation for the fact that if you bring people together and reduplicate the situation of the world at large with no uniting meta-narrative, let's say, you also bring in all of the conflict. Like, obviously, because the delusion seems to be that now, just because they're, and I think maybe it's fueled by an underlying materialism. So maybe the notion is, if you bring diverse people from all over the world, regardless of their culture, and you provide them with sufficient economic opportunity, given that conflict is driven fundamentally by economic need, let's say, or economic differences, that will just vanish somehow magically. Now, I'm not saying anyone necessarily thought this through, but my sense is that the systems of ideas that are motivating these mass occurrences, they have their own internal spirit and forward-moving impetus, and they can be full of internal conflict, and no one really sorts that out. But that's what it seems to be. It's got to be something like, well, we bring everyone together like they are where they already are, but now because they're rich, it's going to work out fine. And there isn't any universal system of values that needs to be preferred other than the plenitude of economic opportunity. And so why do you think there's something to that, right? Because I would say you could make a case, although it's not obvious, that people who are in comparative poverty are perhaps more likely to turn to conflict, although I don't think the relationship is one-to-one. What do you think is wrong with that theory of peace bequeathed by economic opportunity, and why?
Well, let me put it in biological terms. There are two basic reasons for any creature, but especially humans, to collaborate. The most primary reason is genetic relatedness. The second reason is the value that is created through reciprocity. And if you'll allow me to paint with a broad brush, what we call the West, I believe, is most fundamentally about the agreement to put aside our lineages and collaborate because there's wealth to be produced. And this notion, which, it has its roots in antiquity, but I believe that this was accidentally invented in its current form by the American founding fathers. That in essence, in order to confederate the colonies, they built a set of rules that didn't put anybody at particular advantage. Now, they did it imperfectly. There's obviously some glaring defects in our founding documents and things, but in general, they solved this tremendous problem. And over the course of the next couple hundred years, that system was so unbelievably productive by putting the people who were in the best position to collaborate into contact and facilitating putting their racial differences aside. We became a powerhouse. And so the American experiment became contagious, because once people saw how dynamic it was and what a high price they had been paying for putting their genetic relatedness first, everybody wanted to join it. So that is, to me, the West. And although I am a patriotic American, I'm also I am a patriot of that idea. I think it is the thing that we should rally around. And what it means is that we should take on this cosmopolitan notion that you can partner with anybody. It's really a question of whether they have the right insight and values, not a question of what God they pray to. And that is now under attack. That is under attack from people who would fetishize our differences and make it impossible for that kind of collaboration to happen. So I do see the West as back on its heels and in need of a vigorous defense, which is part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think the world is in great danger if that idea is lost, even for a brief period.
Nobody likes plastic waste, but what about the plastics you can't see? I'm talking about microplastics, tiny fragments contaminating our water supply. Shockingly, 94% of US tap water contains them. That's why we purify our water with Cove Pure, a powerful countertop filtration system that actually works. So why should you care? Because disturbing new research reveals there are up to 100 times more plastic particles in a liter of water than we thought. Some are so small that they slip into your bloodstream, invade your organs, and even accumulate in your brain. Experts say the average person's brain may contain the same weight in microplastics as an entire plastic spoon. Let that sink in. Eventually, this can lead to all kinds of health risks. And I don't think bottled water is the answer either. Heat and sunlight make those bottles leach more microplastics than tap water. And those cheap pitcher filters like Brita, they don't remove nanoplastics or most other contaminants for that matter. They're just like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Cove Pure is 1,000 times more effective than Brita and removes up to 99.9% of contaminants. That includes microplastics, fluoride, heavy metals, PFAS, and more. And the best part is it takes minutes to set up. No drilling or plumbers. Just fill it with water, plug it in, and with one tap, you can get pure water at whatever temperature you want, cold, hot, or warm, instantly. It's the cleanest, best tasting water you've ever tried. Clean water is one of the best investments you can make for your family's health. So make sure you're using the same filtration that Jordan uses. And because we've partnered with them, if you use the link in our description box below, covepure.com/Jordan, for a limited time, you'll get $200 off Cove Pure. So don't miss out.
Okay, so let me ask you about that. And I do also want to return to, I guess we're probably approaching it obliquely anyways, to the transformation of your ideas about political and economic structure. But there's an element of the argument that you just formulated that I can't easily distinguish from the proposition that mere material opportunity will bring peace. So let me walk through your argument and summarize it. Tell me if I've got any of it wrong, and then let's delve more deeply into that possible paradox. So the first thing you posited is that the default social organization for human beings is kin relation, right? And the word kind itself comes from kin. And so we are, by nature, more likely to extend our sense of self to those who are genetically related to us. And there's great utility in that, not least on the reproductive front, if you think about it across time, but also it enables us to form the tight blood-based bonds, so to speak, that are least likely to be broken with the ravages of time. Now, there's a transformation in viewpoint, which you associated most particularly with the founding of the United States, that transformed that idea into something like a more general appreciation for the possibilities of radical altruistic reciprocity, regardless of kin relation.
I wouldn't say altruistic. The thing that drives it
reciprocally altruistic.
Reciprocally altruistic means that we are at advantage by collaborating. We both come out ahead.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm sorry. That's perfectly reasonable restatement. So the notion is that there's tremendous comparative advantage to be gained as a consequence of collaboration independent of kinship. And that's partly because you can draw on a more diverse range of talents and abilities. And developing that argument might buttress suggestions that a more diverse, multicultural population would be useful because of diversity of opinion, if you buy that sort of thing. But then I would take issue with two of your propositions. One is that the core of that is somehow American. And also, although I think the Americans elaborated that very well, but also that I don't see how to distinguish that from the proposition that mere economic success will guarantee something approximating peace, independent of any other overarching framework. Now, it seems to me, so give me one more minute to elaborate on this, and then I'd love to let you respond. I think there are preconditions that have to be met for the idea that non-kin, reciprocally altruistic relationships can be established. I think those are metaphysical presumptions. I think they're encoded generally in what strikes us as religious language, which is a reflection of their depth and necessity. And among those are, as far as I can tell, are those presumptions that are axiomatic to the Judeo-Christian tradition. I think those are a precondition for the development of that attitude of radical reciprocal altruism to non-kin participants that characterizes in its highest form the United States. But I think it's even though that flowered madly with the establishment of the US, its roots are much, much deeper than that. Certainly, you have to give some credit to Great Britain and then to the entire Western tradition behind that. And then it seems to me to the Greek and Judeo-Christian traditions from which that arose. So why stop with the US? I know you don't in some fundamental sense, but also, what do you make of the need for extending that notion of culture beyond the merely economic and pragmatic, or the self-evidently economic and pragmatic?
All right. First, of course, reciprocity as the engine of collaboration isn't invented by the American founders. I mean, in fact, every mutualism that exists in nature is of exactly this sort. So it's not that they invented it. What they did was they invented a set of rules that made it the basis for a society.
Right. So they codified it more effectively in a manner that could be implemented politically and economically.
Yeah, in fact, I would say they codified it well enough for it to be a functional prototype. But that prototype created an unbelievable period of dynamism. When you think of the number of inventions that are American in origin, from the airplane to the computer to plastics, it's mind-boggling how many things Americans accomplished in a short period of time. And my contention is, if we had a society in which you were fundamentally predisposed to collaborate with those who came from the same place you did, most of that wouldn't have happened, right? That this happens only when you're liberated to collaborate with anyone because they're the right partner. So that idea has a tremendous amount of power in it. I also believe that it becomes the nature of a functional, stable globe that does not rip itself apart in conflict. Now, I take your challenge. How do we know that simply distributing that the spread of economic well-being won't cause peace to break out? And the reason
it didn't in China.
It doesn't really anywhere absent this agreement. What you want, if in the end you start realizing that you are closely related to this set of people, and at the moment, whatever group you have is in a position to get the jump on some other group who's less closely related to you, then that game, the game of lineage versus lineage competition and violence, which has characterized virtually all of history until the last couple hundred years, that game is constant. This is the only alternative we have to it. And the hope is that it is the best. I'm not interested, as I know you are not, in a world where well-being is perfectly evenly distributed. I don't want it perfectly evenly distributed because that suggests,
it's impossible in any case, but yes.
Even if it were possible, a world in which everything is evenly distributed is a world that is punishing people who contribute more and rewarding people who contribute less. What I want
it also forestalls any possibility of trade, because if there are no differences between you and I, then of economic significance across the multiple dimensions of potential economic comparison, there's no motivation whatsoever for us to collaborate, right? Because we can't rise out of our radical equality anyways, plus everything we have is exactly the same. So it means it just makes a mockery of the notion of, well, progress and trade. And that means that we're now unable to capitalize on our differences. So that is the antithesis of this diversity that's being put forward as a panacea.
This is why communism is so closely associated with scarcity, is it demotivates exactly the thing that makes a society function. So I don't want that. But, and if we'll get back to the question of why I still see myself as a liberal, I do want to see something as evenly distributed as possible. And that is opportunity, right? The market works best when somebody who has the potential to contribute something wonderful is not sidelined cleaning someone else's toilet, right? So to the extent that everybody has access to the market and that they are rewarded when they bring something to humanity that makes us better off, you get a system in which wealth is not perfectly evenly distributed. In fact, maybe you would expect a kind of Pareto principle distribution, but that nobody is frozen out, right? If you're down in the low quadrant, according to the Pareto principle, but you have the ability to find your way out by contributing something good, then your motivation to do it is maximal. And so anyway, that to me is what a hard-headed liberal would see as desirable.
So if I understand you correctly, you see the limit case to multiculturalism as something like the fundamental antagonism between a kin-based ethical system and a more abstracted system based on the notion of abstracted reciprocal altruism. It's something like that. So what you're basically saying is that those two orientations cannot coexist peacefully. They are, in essence, antithetical to one another. And so then that begs the question. The next question then would be something like, are there cultures that are more tilted in their ideological proclivities towards the kin-based allegiance system, and others that are more tilted, like the European countries, towards a more abstract formulation of what constitutes productive and generous reciprocal altruism?